Hey gang, welcome to part 2 of the Pumpkin King monster build. When I cut out the facial features of the pumpkin, I cut the mouth to specifically fit these vampire teeth that I had bought at the dollar store. I cut the plastic to separate the top teeth from the bottom teeth, and I hot glued them into place. I didn't set them flush with the face so that I could leave a bit of room to go back in with hot glue to make a gum line. After the glue dried, I painted the teeth with a white and the gums with VALLEJO's squid pink. I put a couple of coats of red wash over the gums to help give them a bloodied, raw look. I also put a little bit of red wash around the mouth to help give that a dried blood look. Then I put a couple of coats of sepia wash over the teeth to help darken them and make them look a little more rotted. I'm pretty new to using washes, but I'm finding that what you want to do is make sure you let the area dry before applying another coat, because that helps to build up the color rather than just kind of swash it around. To finish the mouth, I used a black wash where the teeth and gums meet and in between each tooth to help separate them. I also added black wash in the dimples of the gum line to help create shadows. Then I used the red wash on the tips of the fangs to give them a blood-stained look. This is also a good time to take some black paint and go into the nose area and eye sockets to touch up any areas where you may have gotten orange paint while painting the pumpkin face. When it came to painting the rocks, I wanted to darken the scene up a bit since the only time the Pumpkin King is encountered is at night. I used a pavement gray, which is an Apple Barrel brand acrylic paint, to give the rocks a darker look. For the highlights on the rocks, I used a Storm Cloud Gray by DecoArt, and I just did a dry brush technique across the tops of them. It's still a darker gray than I would use to highlight normal rocks, but it worked really well on the pavement gray and still helped maintain that darker look in the scene. If you're new to painting miniatures or terrain and you don't know what dry brushing is, or maybe you're just unsure of how to use it properly, all it is just loading paint up onto your brush and then using a towel to wipe as much of that paint off as you can, usually about 90 to maybe 95% of it, and then just lightly going over the object and trying to pick the highlights specifically on that object out with the paint without getting the paint down into the recesses. Here's a brighter picture so you can get a better idea of how those rocks turned out. I've also added a few pieces of foliage to the base which I've made. I wanted to point out the areas where the arms and the legs join to the pumpkin. I used a green wash to blend that area with the orange because the wash still allows some of the orange to show underneath, and it blends nicer than just going from orange to green, which would leave a clunky look to the transition. I then used a black wash in the recessed areas to help provide that shadow look. Here I'm just taking straight PVA glue and using a brush to stipple it around areas of the base that I want to add flocking to. Remember to be careful when doing this because it will reactivate the PVA glue already on the project, and hard brush strokes will cause your sand and rocks to just begin sliding around the base. Now the flocking that I'm adding here is flocking that I made using dried coffee grounds, and I've mixed it with brown for the dirt and then a dark green for the under foliage and then a light green for the highlighted foliage. Now I don't think that coffee grounds are the greatest flocking material, but if you're especially working on a budget. This is easy to make, and it's very cheap compared to what you're going to pay for at the hobby stores for actual flocking. And while it may not be the best material for flocking, it can produce some wonderful results. When all the flocking is on, I just spray the entire base with my 50-50 mix of water and PVA glue. This helps to set everything, and I did this later into the evening, so it probably set and dried for about 12 hours. The leaves that I used for this project came from Hobby Lobby. Normally I would just use leaves from the dollar store flowers because of expense, but I had gotten these for free from my sister, who had bought a bunch of flowers to make wedding bouquets, and she didn't need the leaves. So a tip for you is to let friends and family know if you're looking for things for your crafting, because you never know what scraps of things they may end up with. And it will work perfectly fine for what you need and would probably just end up in the trash otherwise. Now I just left the leaves on the stems for this project instead of cutting them all off and gluing them on one by one. And when you're doing something like this, you just want to dry fit your pieces before you glue them onto your projects. That way you can trim the stems down and make sure that everything's at a size that's going to work for your project and fit properly. I used a bark brown by Anita's to paint the stems, and then I stippled a foliage green by DecoArt in a few places to help blend the colors with the colors of the arms and legs. For some final touches on the base, I took a green wash and just went over some of the brighter green flocking to help tone it down a bit. And then once it dried, I just took some black wash and touched it up a bit. All of the paints that I used in this build are acrylic craft paints. Craft paints are far cheaper than miniature paints, which is perfect for a build this size, and when thinned properly, they work fine even through an airbrush. I'll be posting a tutorial about how I thin my paints for airbrushing. But in the meantime, just doing a YouTube search on the subject is going to just give you all kinds of results. As for the main painting of the pumpkin, I just used an orange by Sargent Arts, which is another crafting acrylic paint. For the ribs of the pumpkin, to help create shadow, I mixed 5 drops of the orange paint with 1 drop of black paint. For the highlights around the top of the pumpkin, I just mixed 5 drops of orange with 2 drops of a yellow. For the stem, I used a foliage green by DecoArt, and then did a light spray of bark brown by Anita's. And here are a few pictures of it at the table with some regular size miniatures, so you can get an idea of just how towering this Pumpkin King really is. So there you have it, gang. Part 2 of my take on the Pumpkin King. A monster craft build that's guaranteed to help bring extra chills and thrills to your next Halloween-themed tabletop RPG session. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button. While you're here, leave a comment in the belows. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click on the bell so that way you're notified when I post my next video. I'm trying to post a video every other Friday. Until then, happy crafting, happy gaming, and thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Fear the Platypus, and this one is done. So there you have it, gang. My take on part 2 of the Pumpkin King. A Halloween-themed monster build. So there you have it, gang. Part 2 of my take on the Pumpkin King. So there you have it, gang. Part 2 of my take on the Pumpkin King. A Halloween-themed craft monster. Wow, this is so much easier when you can just read it. So there you go, gang. part 2 of my take on the Pumpkin King. A monster... excuse me.